Welcome to Phoenix Podcast, hosted by Amin Moinian, where we deep dive into economics and politics.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes a single event can really make you stop and think
Yeah.
about the bigger picture.
Yeah.
Like what happens when a huge company like Amazon decides to just shut down all its warehouses in an entire province.
Wow.
That's exactly what happened in Quebec. And it left 1,700 full-time workers and hundreds more temporary workers without jobs.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
So today we're going to deep dive into this situation and see what it tells us about the relationship between workers' rights, government policies, and a healthy economy.
It is a fascinating case, isn't it? It really highlights how tricky it can be to find the right balance between protecting workers and creating a business environment that attracts investment and creates jobs.
Yeah, totally. It's like walking a tightrope.
Right.
So to help us unpack this, I thought we could start by looking at some ideas from classical liberalism. I know it might sound a bit dry, but trust me, these ideas are at the heart of how we think about economics and government today.
Absolutely. Thinkers like Adam Smith and John Locke had some pretty revolutionary ideas back in the day.
Okay, so let's start with Adam Smith. He's famous for this idea of the invisible hand.
Yes.
Can you break that down for us?
So imagine a bustling marketplace where everyone is looking out for their own best interests. Buyers want the best deals. Sellers want to make the most profit.
Right.
Smith argued that even without any central planning or controlled as self-interest, actually leads to a pretty well-functioning system.
Oh.
It's like an invisible hand, guiding everyone towards what's best for the economy as a whole.
So basically, Smith was saying, let the market do its thing.
Exactly. He believed that government intervention often messed things up more than it helped.
Okay.
Now, John Locke focused on the idea of individual liberty and property rights.
Okay.
He argued that people should be free to make their own choices and that no one, not even the government, should be able to take away what you rightfully own.
Okay, so how do these classical liberal ideas apply to this whole Amazon situation in Quebec?
Well, let's think about it. From a classical liberal perspective,
Yeah.
forcing a company to unionize, even if it's meant to protect workers, could be seen as going against the whole idea of a free market.
Well, it's like the government sticking its hand into the market and messing with the natural flow of things.
Exactly. And remember Locke's emphasis on property rights. Well, some might argue that a company like Amazon should have the right to manage its own operations and negotiate with its employees directly without the government mandating union involvement.
But isn't the point of a union to protect workers from being exploited by powerful companies? Surely that's a good thing, right?
Of course, protecting workers is important, but it's not always that simple. There can be unintended consequences to even well-intentioned policies.
Okay.
For example, some research suggests that high unionization rates can actually discourage investment.
Really? How so?
Think of it this way. If you're a company looking to build a new factory or invest in research and development, you want to go to places where you feel confident you can operate smoothly and predictably.
Makes sense. No one wants to invest in a place where they think there's going to be a lot of conflict or uncertainty.
Right. And some companies might see high unionization rates as a sign of potential disruptions or increased costs.
So they might be less likely to invest in places like Quebec, even if they have other advantages.
Precisely. And this is where it gets really interesting, because Quebec has a particularly high unionization rate, much higher than the rest of Canada. And guess what? There's some evidence to suggest that this might be playing a role in deterring investment in the province.
Wait, are you saying that trying to protect workers might actually be hurting them in the long run if it leads to fewer jobs and less investment?
It's a complex issue, and it's not about saying one side is right or wrong. But there's some pretty compelling data to suggest that heavily unionized industries tend to see less investment overall.
Okay, so you're telling me that industries with a lot of union members actually get less investment. Do we have any idea how much less?
There's research that suggests industries with average levels of unionization experience a drop in investment, somewhere between 18% to 25% less.
Wow. That's a pretty big difference compared to industries where workers aren't unionized.
Yeah.
And what about investments in things like research and development? The kind of stuff that leads to new technologies and innovation.
That's even more striking. The same research indicates that R&D investments can plummet by 28% to 40% in heavily unionized sectors.
Whoa, those are some pretty significant numbers. So are we saying that Amazon's decision to close up shop in Quebec might be part of a bigger trend, that maybe companies are hesitant to invest in places with strong unions?
It's certainly a possibility, and it raises some tough questions about how we can create policies that both protect workers and foster a thriving economy.
Yeah, this is definitely giving me a lot to think about. It's like every decision has a ripple effect. And
Hmm.
sometimes even the best intentions can have unintended consequences.
Exactly. And it highlights the need to consider all sides of the issue before jumping to conclusions
Right.
or implementing sweeping policies.
Okay, so we've talked about Adam Smith and the invisible hand, John Locke and property rights, and how these classical liberal ideas might shed some light on the Amazon situation in Quebec.
Hmm.
We've also seen how good intentions, like trying to protect workers through unions, can sometimes lead to unintended consequences like discouraging investment and ultimately hurting the very people they were meant to help.
It's a classic dilemma, isn't it?
Yeah,
How do we find the sweet spot where we can support workers' rights without stifling economic growth?
that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's one we're going to keep exploring as we dive deeper into this case. What are your thoughts so far? What stands out to you from what we've discussed?
What strikes me is how easily we can get caught up in the back and forth of pro-union versus pro-business.
Yeah.
It's almost like we forget that the goal is to create a system
Yeah.
where everyone can benefit.
You're right. It shouldn't have to be a zero-sum game.
Right.
It's not like we have to choose between workers having good jobs
Yep.
and companies being successful.
Exactly. What if we shifted our thinking entirely?
Mm-hmm.
Instead of focusing solely on unionization,
Go ahead.
maybe we should be asking how we can create environments where workers feel genuinely valued and empowered to negotiate fair terms on their own.
Okay, I like where you're going with this. So what would that look like in practice?
Imagine a workplace where there's open communication
Mm.
between employers and employees,
Hmm.
a place where workers have a real voice in decisions that affect their jobs.
So instead of relying on a third party,
Yeah.
like a union, to negotiate on their behalf,
Mhm.
workers could directly engage with their employers.
That's the idea. And it doesn't have to be adversarial.
Okay.
To think about things like employee ownership programs
Mm.
or profit-sharing models. These can give workers a literal stake in the company's success.
That makes a lot of sense. If workers feel like they're partners in the business, they're probably going to be more invested in its success, right?
Absolutely. And they might be less likely to feel the need for a union to protect their interests.
Okay. It's about aligning incentives.
This all sounds great in theory, but are there any real-world examples of this working? I mean, are there companies out there that are actually doing this successfully?
Definitely.
Hmm.
There are plenty of companies, big and small, that have implemented these kinds of initiatives and seen positive results. Higher worker satisfaction, increased productivity, and ultimately a better bottom line for the business.
So it's not just some utopian dream, right? There's actually evidence that this approach can work.
Exactly, but it requires a shift in mindset, both from businesses and from workers. But the potential benefits are huge.
Okay, so we've talked about creating more collaborative work environments. What other ideas are out there for empowering workers without relying on traditional unionization?
Well, another approach is to focus on giving workers the information and resources they need to make informed decisions about their employment.
So instead of the government dictating terms and conditions, we give workers the tools to advocate for themselves. Right, this could involve things like promoting financial literacy, providing access to skills training, or even creating platforms where workers can easily compare wages and benefits across different companies and industries.
That's interesting. It's like leveling the playing field by giving workers more transparency and control over their careers.
Exactly, and when workers are empowered to make informed decisions, it can actually benefit businesses too.
Wait, how so? I would think that giving workers more leverage would make things harder for businesses.
Not necessarily. Think about it. When workers feel like they have genuine choices and aren't trapped in a job they hate, they're more likely to be engaged and productive.
Oh, I see what you mean. Happy workers are generally more productive workers, which is good for everyone.
Precisely. And when companies have to compete for talent
Mm-hmm.
by offering good wages, benefits, and working conditions, it raises the bar for everyone.
So in a way, empowering workers could actually lead to a more dynamic and competitive economy.
That's the idea. It's about moving away from a top-down adversarial model and embracing a more collaborative and bottom-up approach.
This all sounds very promising, but I'm sure there are challenges and complexities involved in implementing these kinds of changes. After all, we're talking about shifting deeply ingrained mindsets and power dynamics.
Absolutely. There's no quick fix or one-size-fits-all solution, but the Amazon case in Quebec is a perfect example of why we need to be thinking outside the box and exploring new approaches to labor relations and economic policy.
Well said. We've thrown a lot of ideas out there today.
Mm.
And it's clear that there's a lot to unpack when it comes to finding the right balance between workers' rights and economic growth. What are your thoughts so far? What resonates with you from what we've discussed?
Yeah, it really is fascinating how this whole deep dive into the Amazon situation in Quebec has opened up a whole new way of thinking about work.
Yeah, it's not just about unions versus businesses. It's about finding solutions that work for everyone.
It really is. The Amazon case is like a microcosm of the challenges we face in creating a more equitable and prosperous society.
And it shows how even well-intentioned policies can sometimes backfire, like the goal of supporting workers is great.
Right.
But if those policies end up discouraging investment and hurting the economy,
Yeah.
then everyone loses.
That's the tricky part, isn't it? It's all about finding that delicate balance.
Yeah.
We need to protect workers' rights, but we also need to make sure businesses can thrive and create jobs.
It's like a giant puzzle.
Yeah.
And we're all trying to figure out how the pieces fit together.
And there's no single right answer, is there? What works in one context might not work in another.
Yeah.
We need to be flexible and adaptable, and most importantly, we need to keep talking to each other.
You're hitting on a key point there. It's about open dialogue.
Yeah.
And a willingness to consider different perspectives.
Yeah.
It's easy to get stuck in our own ideological bubbles. But real progress happens when we're willing to listen to each other and find common ground.
Exactly. And it's not just about governments and policymakers. Each of us has a role to play in shaping the future of work.
Okay.
As consumers, we can choose to support businesses that treat their workers fairly as investors. We can prioritize companies that are committed to creating positive social impact.
It's about taking responsibility and using our voices and our choices to make a difference.
Absolutely. And as technology continues to transform the way we work, it's more important than ever to have these conversations.
Yeah.
We need to think critically about the potential impacts of automation, artificial intelligence, and the gig economy. And we need to find ways to ensure that these changes benefit everyone, not just a select few.
It's both exciting and a little bit daunting, isn't it?
Yeah.
The future of work is constantly evolving, and it's up to us to shape it in a way that's fair, total, and ultimately beneficial to all.
Well said. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one key takeaway you'd like our listeners to remember?
For me, it's the realization that there are no easy answers. We can't just rely on old solutions to new problems. We need to be creative. We need to be willing to experiment. And most importantly, we need to be open to learning from each other.
I couldn't agree more. The Amazon case in Quebec is just one example of the complex challenges we face in navigating the future of work. But it's also a reminder that we have the power to shape that future by engaging in thoughtful dialogue, embracing new ideas, and working together. We can create a world where both workers and businesses can thrive.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it's given you some food for thought. And remember, the conversation doesn't end here. Keep exploring these issues, keep asking questions, and keep pushing for solutions that benefit everyone.